I'm Vance Bastian, here with my co host S.A. Baz Collins, bringing you this week's Written on the Edge, Season 11, Episode 27 interview. That's right, we're halfway through the year. We are joined by Charles Close to discuss his novel, The Blood Thief, Volume 1, The Short, Happy Life of Alex Rose. So let's get to know our guest. Charles Lawrence Close III got his first published novel rolling during the pandemic when he should have been working on his capstone project for his master's degree at Johns Hopkins in NGO management. He wrote enough to fill two books and still managed to pull straight A's and graduate with high honors. The Blood Thief, Volume 1, The Short Happy Life of Alex Rose, is sort of his first book. He also wrote a Jack Kerouac style novel about his crazy times living in Mexico and Russia, but he felt it was a little self indulgent and will probably revisit it at some point when he gets all the fictional characters that are spinning around in his brain a home on paper. And we're going to come back to talking about series Bibles in a second. The next edition of Alex Rose's adventures is well on the way with The Blood Thief 2, My Own Personal Bethlehem, coming out soon. He cares deeply about giving back to the community and believes that doing unto others as you would have them do to you is the best way to live. When he isn't volunteering for a nonprofit, you can find him skating pride parades with synchronized dance crew, practicing Jean Fa, learning the piano or turntables, and climbing cliffs and gym walls like a savagely dazzling, inappropriately velvet wearing creature of the night. Charlie, welcome to the show and thank you for that bio.
No, thank you. I got my little author jacket on. I bought this for myself when I published my first book because I thought I deserved it.
Love
So
it.
I definitely love wearing it. And I might take it off at some point. It's humid as all get out over here. But I just kind of I dig that whole little outrageous style that would be I think pretty apropos for for a vampire or just somebody who's crazy and likes to dance all night.
Hey, you gotta have the multi-purpose pieces, right?
Right? Totes.
So my first question for you
Yeah.
is that looking at your bio, you are very active. You are pursuing a master's degree, and we happen to know that writing a book is a very lonely, solitary, focused project. What was your impetus to put pen to paper and actually start writing novels?
Man, there's a whole big background to it, but and actually I've already got the master's degree that I did it in like just about a year, which dang near killed me, but
Nicely
I
done.
pulled it off. Thank you. But yeah, like I've just been creative ever since I was a kid. I was kind of thinking back to this, and one of the first like really cool art writing things that I did was like I used to do these things. There was like something in like Tiny Toon Adventures. They went to some place called Wacky Land on there.
Okay.
And so it was just all full of like these cool plays on words and stuff like that. Like I remember sitting with my bestie Jessie Gwynn in like second grade, and we'd make these big maps with like drawings of things, and they would have like a palm tree, and it would be a tree with like hands and stuff like that. So I just really love like plays on words and that kind of stuff. And I would just sit around like messing around with that for ages. And then when I was in like high school, I was big into Jim Morrison, and I would sit around writing like really bad poetry that I thought was totally like him. And some of it was like was decent stuff, but some of it was just like me just going on about like trash. But but yeah, so I've just always been super creative like that. And I think I was just kind of like really looking for my own voice and my stories to tell. I wound up I wound up traveling around a bunch because I wanted to get a bunch of experience, and I wound up going to Mexico and living for a while, and Russia and New York City to go study acting. And so I wrote like a big Jack Kerouac style on the road kind of novel where I made like different characters for my actual friends' names and all that good stuff. And it was a really good start to writing, but it was just yeah, like I said, it was like self-indulgent and maybe a little glorifying of like some alcoholism that I was totally going through. And I'm like, I haven't had a drink since 2020, so
Congratulations.
I've been on that road to recovery, and I've been totally enjoying every minute of it. But yeah, and so I've been just being extra creative. And I wrote this novel during the pandemic. I really got a start on it. I've had these ideas in the back of my brain for ages, and I was a big Anne Rice fan. And when she passed away, like right around during that time, and I thought, you know what, like life is short, and fuck it, like I'm just gonna go for it and do my thing, and just like get these things out that I've always wanted to do.
Love it. So, if I were to walk up to you at a book fair, a pride event, a place where you're giving away books that you shouldn't, and I were to see that beautiful dark cover with that cliff and that red sky, yeah, hold it up so people can see what I'm talking about.
Bam, bam, baby.
Beautiful. If
That
I were
is
to see,
that's art courtesy of my good friend Stan Osipov. I commissioned him to do it, and yeah, he is just a wizard with pen and paper, and I couldn't have done that without him.
100% props and kudos to you for using a human and not AI.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
yeah. So if I were to walk up and see that on a table in front of you and be captured by that cover, and I turn to you and I say, "What's this book about? What's your elevator pitch?"
Wow, wow. I know that's always the hard part for me, the marketing. I would just say that my book is it's a story about somebody, when you get down to the core of it, it's a story about somebody who's trying to do the right thing, trying to, make up for his mistakes in a world that doesn't always give people the luxury of being able to do that easily. Um, but then, there's like so much more to it than that. It's a ghost story, it's a love story, it's a vampire story. I really love all those like thrills and chills. And
Mhm.
I also, it's a little genre bending. I really was like a big fan of like Anne Rice's books, and I was a big fan of the show White Collar,
Oh
with Matt
yes.
Bomer as Neil Caffrey. And
Yep.
and there was like some quote that Anne Rice like had Lestat say in like the books, talking about like saying he's the James Bond of the vampires. And I wanted my own like James Bond of the vampires kind of thing. I wanted something with big high stakes and like maybe like a little bit of an international conspiracy with the fate of the world at hand. And I know that sounds like crazy big, but yeah, that's what I always wanted to do. And I wanted to combine those really fun elements in it.
Love it. I mean, if you don't aim big, why bother, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what should readers know about Alex?
Um, wow. What should they know? That I think he is somebody who has been through a lot of trauma and always tries to do the right thing. He's always trying to make up for his past on there. There's this big line I had when he's like going off. He's got like this part where he's gonna try to just complete one last heist. Get that last job in, and he kind of worries that he might that the reason why he might fuck things up sometimes is because he might like doing it, that he might like seeing the world a little chaotic, and I think that like that's kind of a fear that I have sometimes. I think like sometimes I don't think I can like settle down for like any kind of a normal life because I just really like things being on the edge.
Hmm.
I don't nearly as bad as any like blood drinkers or like or people who are like stealing for a living, but I think there's definitely like an aspect of me like in the dangers in life, and like in just to go on impulse. I've kind of done that a little bit. When I moved to Russia, it was to go to an acting school, but I just saw like an ad on like some targeted Facebook ad that said, "Do you like acting and you like traveling?" And I was like, "Shit, yeah, I do." And I just went there having no idea what this program was like. I did
Wow.
not speak the language, and I was like got in all these crazy situations, like, but it was so much fun. I got to like live by palaces and like jog through like parks with big, cathedrals with onion domes, stuff like that. So I do a little bit of that too.
Nice. And obviously, Alex does.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Now, you've definitely tapped the supernatural element for this as well.
Mm,
I'm
yeah.
going to ask if you're sharing publicly your vampire mythos, because vampire fans love to know what's your origin for your vampires.
Oh man, well, I'm getting to that in other books, so
Okay.
it's kind of under wraps, but I will.
Don't spoil anything. We don't ask for
No, no,
spoilers.
no. But I will say that I'm going to get like to that, and it's going to involve a little bit of like Greek mythology stuff that I've really loved. Like I really liked the story of Dionysus, and I thought it was interesting how there's like all these like parallels between like dying gods and and vampires, between like blood and wine, things like that.
And then like
And just how
drinking
like
ecstasy and
yeah, and just how like the cycle of like life and death is really connected because I think that's like a big part of the whole Dionysus myth is that, he's like, a vegetation god and there's all these like, the whole big cycle, of like life being just captured in like a little seed that dies on the earth and comes back as something, something
mhm.
sprouting and nourishing to the people. And so there's going to be a little bit of that in there. But also just I want to try to keep my stuff like a little grounded, not quite like magical realism, but I always think like how would these things go about in the real world?
Mhm.
So there's a little bit of that too.
D-
Yeah.
do you like imagine the science behind how this could work?
I mean, not terribly, but in some ways, I definitely have read like a lot about like how much blood is in a human body
Mhm.
and things like that. Like my Google searches are full of like crazy
Oh,
stuff these
never
days,
look at an author's Google searches ever in
right?
the history of ever.
I almost feel like I have to like put some little sidebar on my searches being like FBI, CIA, do not worry. I'm just looking up bomb making and how to like make a concoction that will
You know
like
what?
drug somebody and tell the truth.
Start every search with I am an author and I need to know how to make a bomb.
Right.
I'm an author and I need to know how much blood is in the average cow.
Not for anything nefarious. It's all for art.
All right. So, how does it feel to have joined the ranks of queer authors?
Of what authors? I'm
Of
sorry.
queer authors.
Queer authors. Oh man, it's such a dream come true. I have been really influenced by a lot of great ones that I totally look up to. I share the same birthday as Oscar Wilde. That's always
Oh,
been like,
nice.
yeah, that's always been a super big point of pride for me because I've really loved him ever since I've got into him. I'm actually on the side. I'm writing like a bunch of kind of fairy tales like he did. But that's sort of I've got like crazy ADHD that gives me all kinds of ideas but doesn't, let me finish them. So I'm really trying to like focus on my vampire novels, but eventually I want to make these stories for for some members of my family, like my nieces and nephews, just something for kids. So hopefully I'll do that before they get too old.
Nice.
But yeah, I'm more than pleased to be in their pantheon of all those queer writers because they really opened the door for me to do amazing stuff. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we stand on the shoulders of giants for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So, one of the other topics you mentioned that I wanted to hit on and kind of ask if you've included this was social justice in literature. Did you include any
Yeah.
of that in your novel?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, I think my big theme that I wanted to get through in my novels is that whole golden rule, the whole don't do anything to somebody that you wouldn't want done to you.
Hmm.
And I think
Must
I've
be hard
always
for
wanted,
vampires.
what's up?
Must be hard for a vampire to
It
vilify
totally
it.
is, but I think it's hard for everybody
Yeah,
sometimes,
and
you know?
doesn't Alex start as a thief? Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's hard to justify that stuff. But I think in like this society that we're in where capitalism is kind of running a little rampant, that I think, that can be justified if you're doing it if you're doing it to the right people.
are
And
you
I'm
are you
not
Robin Hooding it without criminalizing it?
totally.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a little bit because I think, at some point you have to look at what's going on and say that a lot of the things that we do consider, a lot of the things we do consider moral, or a lot of the things that we do consider that we do consider something to look up to, like, like being like a business person. If you don't do it the right way, you're gonna be stealing from people. So I think sometimes, it's justifiable to try to take something back, you know?
Yep. Fair, fair.
Yeah.
Baz, I know you love vampires, and I know you're looking at the next season of Anne Rice's television show. You want to hop in here?
Well, here's my thing. Anne Rice, and please, children out there, Stephanie Miller did or Meyer did not invent vampires. Okay, stop with the Twilight comparisons.
Yeah.
That shit it was written. They're fangless vampires. Come on. Anyways, the question that I have for you is, Anne Rice wrote her books, one, to get over the death of her young child. That's why
Yeah.
Claudia is so young in the stories.
Hmm.
But also, she used them as a way of looking back at the worst of us through vampires' eyes. And my question to you is, whenever somebody writes about vampires, my question is always, what's your take on that? Because I think one of the things that separated Anne from a lot of other vampire writers was that she was consumed with the spirituality of them, of the moral implications, how they struggled with that because they still retained all their human memories. They still had
Yeah.
all of that they trauma that they were carrying with them. I've watched a couple of YouTuber reactions, particularly amongst the Black community, who are very pro Louis, which is great.
Yeah.
I understand the right for representation, and that's all wonderful. But the problem is that with Louis, he's a very, very complicated figure, and it's not necessarily where you want to hang your hat. You know what I mean?
Sure.
There are others that you could point to, but my question is, how did you deal with, I'm assuming now because I've not read your book yet, but I'm assuming that Alex was a thief and then was turned. And so, how is he dealing with those moral implications of those two parts of his world? And how does he view humanity now through that kind of lens?
Yeah, yeah. I think he's always struggling to do good despite the fact that he's placed in so many situations where he can't help but being bad and doing bad. Um and I think turning into a vampire only compounds that for him. I leave the first one off on a cliffhanger, and it gets more the sequel that I'm developing gets more into him like coming into his powers and coming into that on his own. It's more the first one is definitely just him trying to make up for all the things that he's done in his human life and trying to do better on there. Um and I have like this view of vampires also from like a religious perspective. My background is in comparative religions, like studying that. I was big on like Joseph Campbell in college. Excuse me. And I wanted to for a little
Same
while.
with Vance and me.
What's up? Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was for a little while I was going to study comparative religions, and I was going to, I wanted to be like a professor, teach religion like that. And I wound up going into a different field from my master's. I wound up going into like nonprofit and non-governmental organization management because I really wanted to like do some concrete good in the world by helping other people out.
Mm.
And that's why like during the pandemic I really got started on this book. I have like this whole side plot where like, these characters are trying to steal a disease to use it for something bad. And so I think my character's like going on in and trying to stop that, because I can also see like people thinking of like vampirism as related to a disease, but this person is trying to fight that. He's trying to really top these, or try to get over these horrible impulses and try to always do better. I want to think of them as is just like any of us as people who, have the ability to do good and bad. They could be angels, they could be demons. And it's really just the direction that they decide to go in. And I also think that, I think that, if you have like some kind of supernatural power, there's really ways where I feel like you couldn't help but like try to want to do good. Like if you could read a person's mind, I don't think you would just see them as, as somebody who's so different from you, as somebody who's completely other. And so I wanted to have like their supernatural powers be like an ability to, in the best cases of them, be like an ability that helps them really empathize with people and really wants to make them, really, really focused on like trying to do good.
Right. Yeah, and because you have all these different takes on the supernatural, but each all of them follow certain ethos, and you kind of have to get a feel for where the author's coming from
Mhm.
and what they're grounding in. For Anne, it was based in her Catholicism, something she returned to later on in life as she got older, and her books became much more influenced by her Catholicism.
They sure did, yeah.
And so when you have that, and then you have shows like Supernatural, which dealt with the whole demon versus angel kind of aspect to things. But all of them are ways of examining humanity, that
Mhm.
looking back, it's the reflection of what could be the worst in us. And how do we grapple with that? I mean, they're just external versions of all of those fears that, and those horrible thoughts we may have that we never may act upon, but we all possess them. They are all part of our nature, that darkness that we carry with us. So when you write about that, are you consciously aware of this? Because I write about perceptions.
Mhm.
Perceptions are like the big thing with me because they govern everything we do, yet we give them very little due. And our perceptions are usually wrong in many respects because we're not
Mhm.
well informed. So I find that great fodder. Well, with vampires, with supernatural, you have a way of heightening that drama through their supernaturalness. So when you're
Yeah.
crafting these characters in your world, are you taking into account the psychology, the trauma, the aspects of what their existence has been? Because like in Charlene Harris's True Blood series, she had the Fae against the vampires. So you had this
Yeah.
dichotomy going on. So there's always these setups like that. So how are you dealing with it? I think we have another author, Christian Baines, who has his Arcadia series, which deals with a very, very large perspective on this world, this supernatural world he's created. So how are you forming that, and did you have to map it out so that as an author you know what everything's out there even though you're breadcrumbing it to your audience?
Um, Yeah, I mean, well, okay, so first of all, let me just say that, yeah, I really like, what you were saying about like the trauma informed. I think like all of my supernatural characters have that. Like a lot of my own character, Alex Rose, is me working through like a bunch of trauma, like childhood or otherwise. I have like this one scene where he's like talking about his mother dying. And that's like really related to like a personal experience that I had when I was a kid. It kind of talks like relates to this one time my sister, she didn't die. She's very much alive and doing well, but she had like this accident when she was a kid and got like, taken off to the hospital. And I remember having to stay with my grandma. And just wondering why I couldn't be with my parents, why I'd see them for a little bit and then get dragged away. So there's like a little bit of a scene like that, where I kind of hash that out. And I think like the psychology of vampires is really amazing because they stand for so much about like hidden desires and um and hidden fears, and I definitely play that out. I think there's an impulse sometimes to let loose in us, and sometimes we would like to be able to to like really get out and, and do somebody harm, and vampires have that ability and, and whether they, act on it or not, I think it's important to say whether a vampire like tries to finish somebody off by drinking their blood or, would only go so far, so there's definitely like those moral arguments that I have in my writing. And then like I've got like a bigger supernatural world that I'm going to come about. Like I've got ideas for all kinds of other characters, and some of them I'll introduce in like my books is in my sequel. I mean, my books I'll definitely introduce them in my books, but I'll introduce them in my sequel. And and I think like I don't want to have anything that's necessarily like a big light versus dark dichotomy on there. I want to show how the struggles that like even like supernatural beings would get into are based more on ideology than they are on like, whether or not they're a fairy or a vampire or something like that, So I'm gonna have like a big wider world with people with characters who, have these very human struggles, but also have supernatural powers.
So it's more along the lines of like the Grimm TV show where these are supernatural beings that are just trying to exist in the world, yet they come up against difficult situations that put them in that kind of hard spot between a rock and a hard place, and they've got to
Totally.
figure out how to navigate that without outing themselves. I mean,
Yeah,
is
I
it
haven't
like a
seen
metaphor
that show.
for outing themselves in a way?
Yeah, I haven't seen that show, but I definitely yeah, there is like, an aspect of like my vampire characters being stuck in, and they have to hide their abilities, they have to try to fit in with society on there. They don't want to get hunted down for being what they are.
You might want to look into that show
I'll
because
check it out. Yeah,
it definitely navigates how these supernatural beings are appear human to others,
totally.
and yet this one person, the Grimm, the guy who can actually see them for what they are, so you kind of get that influence of them just trying to make their way in the world as it exists now, and yet
Yeah.
all kinds of shenanigans happen because there are
Mhm.
still infighting amongst the soups, and
Right.
so you have all of this stuff. But I think that, and the reason why I ask that is because often when you're creating a world like that as an author, you have to know way more than your audience ever will. And
Mm.
so you have to develop the world and its hierarchy. At least that's the impression I've gotten, not only from my own works, but also talking to authors as we have over the last 11 years, how when they're creating something on that grand scale, they have to map out at least the structure of what's being invented or what you're creating, because it needs to have foundation. Because unfortunately, your fans will get to the point where they'll say, but you said in book 3 in page 47, so you have to kind of always be one step ahead and at least be able to answer those questions or those situations if and when they should come up. So my question to you is, as you're getting to, I guess, the second book, the second volume of
Yeah.
what you're working on now, have you fleshed all of that out to the point where you're satisfied that a rabid fan could come to you with a question about book 3, page 42, where you contradict? I mean, that's literally the discussion that authors often have to have with ourselves of
Yeah.
how far. I mean, Vance wrote a book about dreamscapes and things like that. He had to really figure that, and you get a feel for that from the author when they've done that sort of homework. You really feel that ground. That's why Anne Rice stood out like she did.
Hmm.
I always wonder about people who write in that supernatural realm, how much they rely on what, because J.K. Rowling, she wrote about shit that we all knew. We know what a witch is. We know what a wizard is. We know what, so she wrote with things relying on the foundation that we kind of understand what these creatures are. However, when you get to things like with vampires and stuff, there is such a varied miasma of, how those things are structured in everybody's different worlds, that as an author, we need to have that conversation of, especially for aspiring authors, like you
Yeah.
were back in during COVID, you need to have those kinds of conversations with other authors to think, okay, how do you develop? What is it that you do? What tricks do you have? Because as authors, we should always be increasing our tool set, you know. So
Hmm.
how are you, as you approach book two, how are you fleshing that out, and how much are you holding back so that you can breadcrumb it later, or as you say, in a cliffhanger, to let them know, oh, there's more to come, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to that when you're building an entire world that you got to make like rules and things too. And I definitely always have my radar on for like, oh crap, is somebody going to be able to like, is somebody going to see this and point this out, point that out. And I think especially because I'm coming up with like some really historical events, that I'm like tying my books to. I've got like a little bit of like some vampires influencing Alexander the Great's timeline that I'm like coming into, so I'm really gonna delve into the past a little. And it's interesting for me because I'm always like trying to think of like, well, how come like nobody's ever heard of a vampire, if they or seen a real life vampire, so I'm trying to make it a world where they are, where they're out there, but, we just haven't, proved that they exist yet. And why would we not know about them yet? This sort of thing. So there's
Right.
always that kind of radar that's
Yeah.
pinging, on
So,
there.
so your
Um,
series Bible went from this to this.
Oh gosh, yeah. Like I've got like so many other, creatures and
Well,
creations
and
that are
it's
going to
not
be
just that. It's
yeah.
you mentioned Alexander the Great. You know, you could have Hephaestion. Actually, they have the whole thing where he was drowned in the river. What if he was turned? And that was
Mm,
a cover up, so that you can
yeah.
play with historical situations
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
color it as a way that the body politic at the time could have
Yeah.
covered up something that actually wasn't the whole story. You know what I mean?
Totally. Exactly. Yeah. My whole thing, and this isn't giving away too much, but there was a story of how Alexander and his army burned down, Persepolis, I think it was like the Persian
Hmm.
capital.
Hmm.
And like they just have this story of this one, like they called her a courtesan or something like that was hanging out with Ptolemy. And so I wanted like some, like that's going to play big into my history on there. And I was thinking like, oh, what if like Alexander the Great had kind of a supernatural backing to him, like some like advisor in a Gandalf kind of capacity, like this,
Yeah.
being who's got powers and who's like behind the scenes working, sort of thing. So
Yeah,
there definitely
especially
will be.
because there's so much
Yeah.
in archaeology that archaeologists got wrong. And
Right. Right.
and they discover it later, like the I'm sorry, my cat's playing with my Poppy, stop.
Technical kitty difficulties.
Yeah. Gremlins in the mix. That you have those situations where you can take historical accuracies. There was that couple that was in Pompeii. There were the lovers that were embracing each
Oh,
other, and they
yeah.
thought it was a male and a female, and then it turns out no, it was two males. And then,
Yeah.
so you have all of these things that you can take those suppositions that of things we don't really know. It's all
Yeah.
from, associative other cases that they try to make these claims on. And
Right.
yet, you have a lot of straight washing. You have a lot of, so there's all
Yeah.
these things that go on that as authors can pluck and use as
Hmm.
fodder.
Yeah. And I think it's just so much fun, like playing with those mysteries. Like I'm gonna have like this big story with like the Bronze Age collapse, where we kind of don't know what happened. We know of like the Sea Peoples, but we don't even know who they are. So I'm gonna go with that and have fun with it. I've got like, some
Especially
big
from other
ideas.
cultures.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there you get into the things that people don't know, which allows you to really comb through, maybe some Indonesian gods, things that,
Hmm.
I mean, there was one episode of Supernatural, I'm thinking in particular, where the boys went to a hotel or a motel that was on the side of the road. They were trapped there, and all of the gods that had been forgotten were staying at the same hotel.
Yeah.
And then you have an angel and a demon show up,
Right.
or the Christian gods who are, the ones that are in power now. And it was this battle between all of these gods and how
Mm,
the belief is what fed them their power. So if people no longer believed in them,
mm.
weren't quite as powerful as they were at the height of their era or whatever. And I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting too, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, again, like, not to give away everything, but I've also got like a little bit of a theogony, I guess you would call it, like I've got my own creation story. I think, my trajectory of it is going to be, start from like little to, to almost, I'm not going to say like an apocalypse, because I don't necessarily believe in that, and I don't think that's a literal thing, but there's going to be like, it's going to be, really big, really, really everything encapsulating. I love, when I read like I finally decided to read like the Divine Comedy, and I think it's really interesting that when you read that, like you realize that like the Dante like just gives you a map of the entire universe as people saw it back then. And I like the same, like, Tolkien kind of did it with the Silmarillion,
Yeah.
where you have like this whole big creation story, and it ties in like, you know gods and the fall of man kind of thing. And I really want to do something like that because I've got like these big ideas for myths on like a really grand scale, and I
Yeah.
want to like tie this all into something that will be that'll be really big and spectacular like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Starting
yeah.
out like a small localized story, of like a conspiracy that's going on in like San Diego and New York City, lots of places. I write from like a lot of places that I've lived in, so it kind of helps me out, being able to go in and say that I if I've walked those streets, that I
Yeah.
can like
Yeah.
that I can give a good description on
You were in
them.
San Diego?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Uh, a
Yeah,
San Diego native.
yeah, no, I heard. Whereabouts do you hang your hat?
I'm in Spring Valley. I'm out in the East County.
Okay, hell yeah. I was a sub for the La Mesa Spring Valley School District. My brother lives out in La Mesa. I'm over in Bay Park right now,
Oh,
so
okay, okay.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, love it out there.
Cool. Well, Charlie, is there anything you wanted to bring up during your episode that we didn't think to ask? It can be about your novel or about your stuff outside of your novel, the dancing, the roller skating. You pick. Is there something you wanted to highlight that we didn't think to ask?
No, man, yeah, I don't know. I've just got like so much. The So I've been working on like a lot of like martial arts stuff. I've got this cool coach John that I've been working with, and I found him when I was at some park, and I just saw these guys working with swords, and I thought like this is cool, and I asked him what are they doing, and he said like yeah, we're doing we do this Chinese martial arts, it's called Jin Fa, and a Jin is like a Chinese gentleman's sword. It's like that one from Crouching Tiger, Hidden
Mhm.
Dragon.
Yeah.
And he was like yeah, we do lessons, and I was like well, I want to do this because I have like these sword fighting scenes in my book. That's like one way that like the vampires are actually able to kind of hurt each other.
Hmm.
And so I started doing these lessons with him, and I wound up like meeting him in a park and taking him home after a lesson. And it was in this like familiar neighborhood in San Diego and Claremont. And I hadn't been back there since I was a kid, really. And I was telling him, I was like, as I was driving him, I was like, this is like where my grandma, like where my grandma's house was. She had a stroke and she wound up moving out, but and he goes, oh, and I said she lived on Baskin Place, and he goes, did she live on this address? And I said, I have no idea. I haven't been there in a while. And when I dropped him off, he lived in the exact same house as my grandma. So
Wow.
yeah. And so there were just like so many of these like little things that like just kind of fell into my lap when I was
Right.
writing, along that Joseph Campbell line, when you're just kind of like looking for that, when you find like that path you want to get on, you'll have all these things help you out. I was at a festival, and I wound up meeting somebody who like helped me publish my book on there. So
Nice.
it's just so cool when like these things fall into place, and that's totally happened for me a lot. And I'm so like fortunate for it, and that I'm able to get out and like talk with amazing cats like you about it. So I'm super stoked about like doing this. Every inch of the journey is like a total gift, and and I'm enjoying it, and I hope that everybody who picks up my book will love it as much as I loved writing it because I've been having a hell of a time.
Awesome.
Bravo.
Are you ready for those get to know you questions?
Yeah, yeah.
Take it away, Bez.
All right. Before we get to that, just want to take a quick moment to say if you like what we're doing here, make sure you like, subscribe, do all the things, hype the video, feed the algorithmic monster that we all have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. We truly appreciate it. If you want to help support us in bringing queer content creators like Charles here, then definitely go to buymeacoffee.com/rope podcast. You can do a one-time donation, or you can go to patreon.com/rope podcast, and we have all of our reactions that I'm doing with Albert, who is a queer author living in Mexico, who has never been exposed to 90% of the queer media that we have up here. So it's always been refreshing to show him new things that he has maybe peripherally heard of but didn't know anything about. And we just started into the whole Christopher Guest ensemble of Best in Show, Waiting for Guffman, and we're going to do A Mighty Wind. So he's now learning about mockumentaries and loving it. So, so that stuff is really, really fun. So you can go up and purchase individual episodes of that to see what his reactions are to them. They're quite enumerating and enlightening coming from a Mexican native who is watching these for the first time. It's like seeing something through new eyes. Or you can go to here in YouTube and you can just join our YouTube memberships. You get the same reactions, however, they are in watch along format. So I give you a minute in the beginning, a minute in the middle, and minute in the end to keep your version of the media that you're watching along with us synced up with our commentary. And but they're up there, and it's only 99 cents a month, so it's less than a buck. We know times are tough financially for a lot of people, so we wanted to provide a very simple and low cost way that you can help support what we do, and we thank you very, very much for it. All right, all of that aside, let's get into the weeds with Charles. So what book, film, or piece of art has had the biggest influence on your writing style?
Man, there are so many. Like Anne Rice was really big, but I think like one of the ones that I just really keep coming back to is Hamlet. Um, I love the language. I think like it's such a cool storyline where there's so many things that just like really encapsulate the human experience. I really love that whole like soliloquy where he talks about like where he says he talks about like the whole like measure of a man kind of thing. He talks about like um I'm trying to quote it, but it'll only be kind of bad right now. But the whole paragon of animals, the whole in voice like an angel and action how like a god. I forget the rest, but I really hear lines like that, and I just get moved almost to the point where I wanna cry. Um, yeah, yeah. So that one has just always been like in the back of my mind. And I think like I kind of like have, a similar story in like a lot of my stuff. There's a lot of revenge stuff that goes on in my books, and I was kind of influenced by that. And also just like it was really cool for me knowing when I really got into Shakespeare, I was kind of struggling as a writer. I would always wonder, if I like had any ideas worth having, worth getting out there. Like I was always like bummed because I couldn't come up with like some really big storyline. And then what I realized about Shakespeare is that he, like so many of his stories are just taken from other things and he made his own. And that was kind of like a green light for me to say, okay, like I've got like all these ideas from like stories that I love, even like Shakespeare stories. I'm putting them into like a lot of my stuff. And you turn those things into your own work. I realized like when I started getting into like the Iliad and the Odyssey, that Homer was probably influenced by like Sumerian myth and like the whole Gilgamesh story. So it just gave me like the license to say like, hey, you are the accumulation of all your experience, and that's like what goes out in your work. And I really loved that that he just, showed me how to like make things my own and like, respectfully glean ideas from like the things that I love, but like, but come up with something original in its own right.
Right, right. If you've never read any of her son's work, you should definitely check out Christopher Rice's stuff. He's
Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant writer. And what I find about him is that he has the same heft to his writing that his mother had. So it's definitely a family trait because his
Hmm.
father was a poet. And so, you have that weight of that kind of environment that he grew up in. But what I find is that it's not watered down, but he does it in a way that is much more accessible sometimes, and could get caught up in the weapon warf of a curtain.
Yeah.
In Renaissance times, she can go on for 2 pages. You're like, okay, Anne, let's move it along.
Right.
We get it's an old curtain. We get it. Okay, but and Christopher does. He has a way of making the work accessible in that way, and I really want to
Yeah.
read the last novel she wrote because she wrote it with him, and I think it would be really interesting to feel two Rice generations go at a story together. But
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah, they collaborated on like the Ramses novels. That was
yeah, yeah.
like that was definitely one of my favorites of hers, and it's really cool to see her like working with him. I really loved just like the whole spooky atmosphere
Hmm.
in that. And I thought like Ramses was so compelling. I kind of love him like the best out of all her characters on there. Like he was just so like effortlessly charming and I really kind of I guess I try to like emulate that sometimes.
Hmm.
So it was really cool seeing them together on
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Well, what fictional or historical character would you invite to march with you at a pride parade?
Man, that's tough. Like I've been like a super geek for like Alexander the Great and all that and all the like because I thought he was just such a really magnetic and cool figure. But then like I would
But then he would
worry
want
that
to conquer
right.
whoever was in
Yeah,
charge.
I
There's
worried
that
that like getting in
issue.
a parade would turn a little too military.
Yeah.
So I'm like, like maybe not the vibe.
Yeah, right.
But,
Exactly.
but I would probably, man, I would probably want to do my birthday twinsy, Oscar Wilde. I think he would be
That would be
really fun.
excellent. That
In a
would be
pride
wonderful.
parade.
Yeah. I'd always want to bring this chick along, but anyways.
Right. But I would say like, man, I would have the best time with Oscar Wilde on
Okay, excellent. I
there.
love that. Okay,
Yeah.
if you or your protagonist had to survive a gay bar karaoke night, what song would you or they belt out?
Oh gosh. I do I I'm pretty decent at finding a lot of the ones that where I'll have like kind of a similar voice register. So like a lot of my classics that I go to are like David Bowie ones because yeah, because I can just really like give a good performance and like and do very rock star looking stuff. But I'll surprise people with with throwing like some rap in every now and then. I'll do like something Eminem and like songs that I've just known since I was like a kid. So everyone would be
Hmm.
like, "How do you know that?" When because he's really tough. Like especially the ones where especially like a rap song where you're just like, if you are off it for a second, you'll be in trouble like catching up on there. So when you can pull that off, people are like, "Whoa." So I think that would be kind of something I would do with, with a vampire because I bet like if you have supernatural abilities, you'd be able to do a bunch of virtuoso performances that would leave
Right,
everybody
right. Well,
kind of wowed.
the Vampire Lestat shows us that Sam
Right.
Reed is killing it out there.
Yeah, yeah, you get in touch with like your inner rock star on there. I one of my coolest times ever was at Burning Man. Uh I was out seeing this DJ Blondish and it was like a sunrise set she was playing. I was up in the front like standing on the speakers of her stage. And that's the cool thing about Burning Man is like you can do shit like that. Like, anywhere else you try to get up front like that and try to do that, they would throw you out of the
Right,
show.
right.
But I wound up like standing on there and I was just dancing. I had a light whip and I was having like the time of my life out there. And they had and she started playing The Doors, this like, this remix of like Riders on the Storm. And I was just thinking like this is like every rock star dream that I've ever had, like since I was a kid. Like I'm out here like dancing in front of everybody. And I know they're not here for me. I know I'm not the star of the show, but I'm like still just taking it in like I was.
Right,
And
right.
it was just so cool. Like so, I really live for experiences like that. It's such a rush.
Love that. All right, what's a place, real or imagined, that feels like home to you and why?
Man, I would I know this sounds kind of cheesy, but I would just say honestly, anywhere where I've got like, good people around and good friends. Like I feel like I can make that kind of thing a home. There's like New York City where I've got like, a bunch of people that I love and I don't get to see them a lot, but I come back to them and that city always feels like home to me, even though it was such a grind, being there all the time. And that city's like not my vibe in a way, but just being around like creative people really makes it for me. I feel the same way with like going up the coast. I went to college in Santa Cruz, so like the Bay Area always feels like home. It's such an eclectic vibe. So big places like that, like obviously, I would feel like at home and like, going back to St. Petersburg and Russia where I lived. So yeah, just any place where I'm like surrounded by cool and creative people. Even I was in even if they're not really my type. Like I was in New Orleans one time and I was on a hitchhiking trip across country and I was like over in the square, Jackson Square, like there's a train line that bisects it and there was just this huge like long freight car train going along where it literally went on for miles, where everybody's all sitting there trying to wait to get over into like the actual city because we were over by the riverfront. And we're like, when is this going to end? And I'm talking to these people, and this lady was like saying, like, asking me what I was doing, and I was telling her like I'm on this like hitchhiking trip. And she goes, "Oh, well, we're at like some Bible study thing, and we're learning how to pray on everybody." And I was thinking like, "Oh, we are like diametrically opposed, like our objectives." But then she goes like, "Can we pray over you?" And I was thinking like, here it comes, like, I'm gonna get some kind of spiel. And the lady just goes like, her and all her kids gather around and they're like, "Dear Lord in heaven, please help Charlie to go on over and have a really good time on his trip and have lots of fun, and meet all kinds of interesting people." And I almost cried. I was like, wow, like that's, some kind of praying that like I could get behind. So even if I'm just meeting people like that, people that change my point of view, that feels like home.
Yeah, excellent. I love that. I love that. All right, what's the strangest or most unexpected place you've ever found an inspiration for a work of yours?
Um, Man, I actually had a really cool inspiration for my work in the street in New York. That's like where I got the name for my main character, Alex Rose. I had this like character in the back of my mind, for all like the stories that I make up, and I didn't have a name for him. Until I was just walking along and I saw that. And it just hit me. I was like, that's who my character is. That's, it was on the way to this cool park that I really loved, Fort Tryon in New York. And it made me think of the whole Ian Fleming inspiration for James Bond. He was looking for like for the name for his character, and he wanted like James Bond to be, like some average person, kind of ish, who gets into like these situations. He didn't want it to be like, this really fancy like name for a spy, and he just like found the name of his character on like the back. He was the author of like a book on ornithology, and I thought it was just so cool because I was like, oh, like same vibes. Like that's just how I found it. I'm just walking along in the street and like these things come to me. So
Yeah,
that was like I just didn't expect it that day, but there it was. And
yeah.
I knew I was going to make that character into a book character someday.
Well, it's the serendipity of life. If you're aware of it, then you're more likely to pick up those clues when they come your direction, you know. You got to be
Right.
open
Yeah.
open to it, you know.
Yeah, yeah, you just got to keep your radar open because I think on some like woo-woo level, we're all kind of magnets for like all the things we want to come to it. We really just gotta open ourselves up to the
Got to
experience.
lift your head up from the phone and
Right.
smell the roses as they go by.
Yeah,
Yeah. That
totally.
part, that part. All right. Which themes or motifs do you find yourself returning to again and again in your work?
Um, I think I keep coming back to the theme of of always trying to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think that's like just re the real important lesson of the universe, and I think that all the other lessons are just are just it's just extra, it's just what would you call it? The rest is just like extra details, on there. I think that's like the big the big message that I try to get across, and the big message that I seek, that I think we could all be in such a better place, like natural beings or supernatural beings, if we just
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
as I enter my sixth decade on this planet, I've boiled it down to one phrase. You can have an asshole, just choose not to be one.
Right. There you
You
go.
know, there you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Finally, what's a piece of LGBTQ literature or culture, music, film, art, or history that never fails to inspire you?
Oh man. I gotta say Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Oh,
I
okay. Excellent
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, I saw that one when I was like I was just getting into like, college and all. And I was a big fan of Rocky Horror Picture Show ever since I was a kid. So it was like, I was told it was kind of that vibes. It's definitely not, other than, but but I remember Rocky Horror Picture Show though, watching that one and being like, "Oh, like people can do things like that." And it was just so seductive and so crazy, and I loved it. But like with Hedwig, it was almost the reverse of that, because it was showing these people that were really trying to lead normal lives, and who were queer, and who were like, it gave me like this big meditation on queer love, and how like that could be something divine and sacred. Like I love that whole origin of love song in that film. Like it was really an eye opener, just realizing that, that being queer could be something sacred,
Hmm.
as opposed to something that should be in the dark, something
In many cultures, it is sacred. So,
yeah. And I realized it was like something you could be proud of, and not and not ashamed of,
mhm.
and that was a real big eye-opening piece that I always think, every time I watch it, I think it's just so amazing and powerful stuff. And I think that one definitely holds up, like, you know, for me and for other generations. I've seen it on Broadway, and I think like, the message was still like, it was cool seeing that, seeing people seeing that for the first time with fresh eyes on stage and all.
Okay. Well, you made it through our list.
Mhm.
Bravo.
Do you have a
Hey.
release date for book two yet?
No, nothing concrete. I'm gonna get this one out, out and about in the world for a little while. But I'm still editing it, and there's definitely a lot of changes that I'm making, especially on the fight scenes. When I wrote it, I had never actually done any sword play. So now I'm like trying to come at it from like somebody who's got like a martial arts perspective. And that's like the tough part, because fight scenes, even if I know martial arts, if I like, or some martial arts, gosh, I know kung fu. But even if you know that kind of stuff, you got to find a way to get it across to people. You got to find a way to like communicate it. And so that's been the interesting part, is trying to get a little technical, but not get bogged down in that, while also, keeping it like interesting, keeping it full of, you know, nature metaphors, if I'm talking about like getting hit by a storm of blows by somebody, things like that. But
Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's definitely a lot of reworking on that. And I'm having a super good time with it. It's cool, because I'll look back at it, as I'm editing it, and there's some stuff that I want to change, and I'll be like, oh, that's kind of cringe. But there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, damn, like that's so good. So So it's really fun for me, it's a fun process, and I'm gonna take like a little bit of time on it, but it should be out sooner rather than later, the sequel.
Well,
Yeah.
where is the best place for people to follow you to get updates on this project? Is it your website? Is it one of the social sites? Where are you most likely to post, hey, next chapter's locked?
Yeah, I guess my Instagram, Charles Close Pics, would be a really good one where I leave updates. I'm bad about doing my website, and I know I should get better on that one. So there will be, but like the best one for, for following me for anything current would be like my Instagram on there. Yeah. And I keep, I put out like a lot of previews for stuff. I put out, a lot of save the dates, and all that good stuff. So I'm getting better at marketing. Eventually, I'll have it locked, but right now I'm just trying to make art and have fun.
Right, right. Well, Charlie, what is your final word of wisdom for folks?
Man, my final word of wisdom is just thank you to everybody, who's helped me along on there. I really have not been able to do it without like all my friends and all my supporters. Like when I first launched my book, I was extra happy that all my friends came out like en masse and like, bought copies of my book. I've had like some of like my best reviews from my like I had an Amazon review from a copy that I gave away, but it was to my second grade teacher, and he just wrote the most glowing thing ever, and it made me really happy. So I just want to say that I'm really profoundly grateful to everybody who's helped me out along the way, and I think that's what we should all strive to be, is like thankful for everybody who's reached out and touched us, artists and non-creative types alike, like I think, we're all just really looking to get our song out there and show people like a little bit of our soul and in whichever way we do it. And I'm really grateful for all those people out there who can shine the light on the world.
And shout out to teachers because they really don't get enough flowers in this world.
Oh, hell yeah. Amen. Amen. But when you look back on it, I think and I think the world would be such a better place if, we looked at everybody and didn't, you know, give people like, kudos
Pay
for
our
making
educators their
so
worth.
much money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they need to get more in their pockets because they do one of the toughest jobs I think on the planet. And I think that
Amen.
they don't get as many flowers as they need to. I think people are waking up to that, but
Right.
you
For
know,
sure. For
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But I feel like the world would be such a better place if, if our like esteem for somebody was based on like how they, made the world a better place than
exactly.
than they left it,
Which would remove all Republicans out of the mix because
Well,
they're only in it for themselves. So,
I hope
job
they'll see
one.
the light. Hey, I can be greedy too at times, so I think we're all trying. But yeah, yeah, it's definitely one of those things where yeah, you can definitely see some lines in the sand, and which people
Yep.
are more on the greedy side on there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, to go back to your words of wisdom, I was just going to say gratitude is beautiful.
yeah.
On that note, folks, we would like to extend a huge thank you to Charles Close for joining us today, for putting his works out in the world, for telling us stories that make us examine our humanity. Charles, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you guys. Thank you for giving people like a platform on there. Really appreciate everything you do.
It is our mission and pleasure. All
Yeah.
right, folks, we at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. If you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. Our show was produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.roguepodcast.com. Tune in next week for your queer media fix.
Ciao for now.
Oh, what's that? Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.